As a consequence, the remaining few million terrestrials will flee, departing from the planet in hopes of finding an alternative planet elsewhere and of settling there. They get help from the descendants of former terrestrials from the Sirius regions. Everything will transpire as it must after the disastrous blunders by terrestrial scientists. Terrestrials will suffer from the scientists' attempts to destroy the destroyer, and the scientists' arrogance and conceit will plummet. They will congregate around the ordinary people and flee from the threatened planet Earth. Only 3 years later the destroyer will enter the former orbit of Mars and ram into the 2 Martian moons, Phobos and Deimos, which had remained intact during the planet's destruction. The 2 moons will disintegrate and trail behind the huge roaming planet as it continues to race toward Earth and ultimately reaches it, but does not ram into it. Nonetheless, the near collision will result in a catastrophic event in which the destroyer smashes into the Earth's moon. This will cause both the moon and the destroyer to shatter into a myriad of pieces, which will form a rotating belt orbiting around the Earth. The oceans, lakes and rivers will also be torn from their beds at this time, and will evaporate into the atmosphere from the ensuing immense heat. The steam, along with gigantic portions of the atmosphere, will be wrenched into space and then dissipate while, at the same time, the Earth's imperceptible expansion process over the past thousands of years becomes evident now. The Earth will heat up from its interior and the planet's surface will ultimately become uninhabitable. Meanwhile, Mercury will enter a collision course with the Sun and will plunge thereon to produce a catastrophe that signifies the destruction of the final remaining harmony within the Solar System. For nearly 100 years afterward, the Sun will generate gigantic eruptions and nuclear fusions once again, as well as protuberances that will extend far into space. By this time the planetary orbits will be destroyed to a point where they will no longer circle around the Sun. No longer will it radiate nor will it become a supernova. After all of this transpires, the Sun will glow and glimmer weakly and generate occasional gaseous explosions along with nuclear fusion activity. Even these conditions will increasingly diminish as time goes on, and eventually all activity will cease completely, whereupon the Sun will drift through space as a dead, dark star, surrounded by equally dead planets. The end will come when the dead Sun, along with the accompanying satellites that drift around it, are attracted and sucked into a black hole. Together they will condense with incredible force and stagnate there until they, and other material within the black hole, are ejected in one massive explosion. This event will generate fresh gases, fine particles and other elements that will develop into new galaxies, stars, planets, moons and other forms. These developments will cover many billions of years. According to calculations, roughly 10 billion years will pass before the Sun and its planets die, exist while dead, and then are swallowed and annihilated by the aforementioned black hole. The predictions also provide important insight into women's future role alongside men. In the more distant future, women will fully regain their former original equal status and rights in the men's world with regard to their complete duties, assignments and tasks. A joint female-male relationship will come to exist, as it did in earliest times when men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, with total equality of rights as they functioned and worked together. As it was in early times, so will it be again in the distant future. That is, women with children shall first and foremost dedicate themselves to their offspring by grooming and educating them, among other things, and will maintain the household. Just as they have done from ancient times, men will attend to and exert themselves for those matters and concerns which were designated to them throughout antiquity due to their male physique, etc. Therefore, the modern proliferation by the women's liberation movements and the single-handed push by women into upper management and responsible positions for their sole supremacy, to mention a few things, will be eliminated once and for all, in order to make room for equality and equal rights that will hold true for both men and women. As a result, men and women will work together jointly on all tasks and will deal with them equally. Neither one man nor one woman will elevate him or herself above the other in rank or power regarding business, administration, government, power and other situations, as is the case today. It is very important to realize, too, that many negative events will occur in the near future regarding diseases and epidemics on Earth. For this reason, all humans must become very meticulous about their personal hygiene and must avoid physical contact with people of questionable health status. There should be paid great attention for harmless diseases and infections, because in future times these can turn into much graver and even incurable illness. The same will hold true also for physical contact with animals, including touching of any type. An additional concern will be the intake of animal origin food products, absorption of viruses, bacteria, etc., of animal substances such as feces, saliva, blood, hair and so forth, which can cause also fatal diseases and epidemics. For this reason alone, creatures of every type should not be kept within the confines of human residences, indeed, they must not be tolerated therein even briefly. The following facts explain the ancestry of the Pleiadians, or rather the Pleiadians, and the old Lyrians. The Pleiadians, as distant descendants of the ancient Lyrians, maintain contact neither with the Sirius intelligences nor today's descendants of the former, creator overlords, regardless of whether they possess positive or negative characteristics. They have no plans for such contacts, not now nor in the near future. Nonetheless, their divergent paths will come full circle and one day they will join again, taking place, at the earliest, when the genetic manipulations are reversed. Only then will the descendants of the former, creator overlords, be sufficiently advanced in their evolution to allow for any contact between the Pleiadians and themselves. The same also holds true for Sirius intelligences, who are completely different human races outside the Enoch lineage. Indeed, they have no hereditary link whatsoever with the descendants of the former, creator overlords. Today's Pleiadians, or rather Pleiadians, and the Lyrians, along with the current peoples of the Enoch-Demian lineage or Demian Enoch who reside in the Dal universe, are all part and parcel of the human life form that is exceedingly elevated in its consciousness and spirituality. They are no longer capable of contacting lesser evolved human life forms, such as Earth humans, inhabitants of the Sirius regions and many other human races on other worlds, without endangerment through the lower vibrations from these life forms, who are less evolved beings. Furthermore, Pleiadian/Pleiadian laws prohibit them from contacting these less evolved entities, and interfering in their internal affairs. Such actions would dangerously intrude upon the self-determined evolution of these less evolved beings. As it is the case with any other life form, each human life form must evolve through its own strength. Higher evolved life forms are permitted to extend to the less evolved beings certain realizations and prospects only through impulses which, on one hand, cannot be recognized as such and, on the other, do not lead to opportunities that would accord greater and more extensive realizations and prospects than those sustained by lower evolutionary levels. Based upon this justification, the Pleiadians have elected to contact neither the descendants of the past, creator overlords, within the Sirius regions and other locations, nor the actual Sirius intelligences themselves. When the old Lyrians ventured to Earth ages ago and commenced their activities among the terrestrials whose actual origins were elsewhere, as explained earlier several times, they selected periods when neither the positive nor negative, creator overlords, or their distant descendants, were present in the Sol system or on Earth, respectively, after the creator overlords had again vacated this region. The old Lyrians, and later the Pleiadians/Pleiadians, were always vigilant, for they had no desire to encounter the creator overlords or their descendants. They did not want a confrontation since they wished to travel their own path, but, additionally, they did not want to be driven into combat with the other Enoch lineage due to their different worldview. This discrepancy in worldview eventually had led the creator overlords, to breed the genetically manipulated peoples, an act of which both the old Lyrians and their descendants, the Pleiadians/Pleiarans, strongly disapproved. From this time onward they refrained from having any contact with Enoch lineage inhabitants from the Sirius regions, as well as with those actual or Sirius intelligences who were no better than the inhabitants from other locations. The old Lyrians in the meantime had progressed in their evolution beyond that of the inhabitants from the Sirius regions, the other Enoch lineage, and the actual Sirius intelligences. And for this reason were any contacts with these groups out of the question, since they would have been far too dangerous for their bodies, indeed, their lives. Although the old Lyrians remained relatively aggressive, scheming and so forth, they were not deprived of simultaneous conscious and spiritual evolution, except for those people who forcibly refused to adapt to the evolutionary process. These groups were forced to leave the Lyra Vega regions and others, whereupon they ventured into the Sol system. Among them were some benevolent and evolved individuals who took upon themselves the sacrifice of leaving along with the refugees, so they could continue their teaching mission of directing the refugees onto the path of humaneness and evolution. In the course of time they succeeded in reaching their goals, although many things repeatedly went awry. On Earth, these old Lyrians intermingled with the terrestrials just as the creator overlords, descendants from the Sirius regions, had done previously. Thus the descendants of the old Lyrians Vegans were also confronted with and subjected to genetic manipulation in the same manner as all other humans on Earth. Their interactions took place in a relatively brief period, since approximately a paltry 3,000 years later no human life forms could be found on the planet who were not heretically affected by the genetic manipulation. This applied to the 144,210 leaders, sub-leaders, and the very positive spiritual leaders who had voluntarily embraced the idea of instructing the refugees, along with several millions of ordinary people, in the spiritual teachings and in other matters. For this reason it is likely that since that time no single terrestrial human life form has existed who does not harbor the legacy of negative and positive degeneration, although it would manifest itself according to the individual's balance, whereas degenerations occur frequently in forms of both negativity and positiveness. Although the old Lyrians had greatly evolved by this time, they nonetheless lacked obedience to the creational natural laws. They often transgressed against them, therefore, and wreaked much havoc. However, this was applicable only to those few million people who had fled in earlier times from their home worlds. On Earth they behaved in much the same manner, and they consequently adopted religions established by the descendants of the creator overlords. They elevated themselves to creator gods so as to spellbind the terrestrials. The old Lyrians therefore were neither the true initiators nor the founders of the religions with their god-creators and creator-gods. Instead they were merely the unscrupulous exploiters of the equally unscrupulous creator overlords, descendants who initiated religious legends, religious fables, god fables, origin of the world fables and other falsehoods. In doing so, on one hand, they wanted to conceal and allow the true origin of the Sol system's human beings from Mars, Malona and Earth to sink into obscurity, so they would not find their way back to the Sirius regions one day. On the other hand, they anticipated that their initiated religions would create conflicts and wars among the genetically manipulated peoples who would subsequently exterminate themselves. They hoped, therefore, that the human Sol system inhabitants would never rise again, nor would they embark upon a return trip to their homeland. The old Lyrians Vegans gradually began changing their mental outlook and started to abide by the spiritual teachings, hence the creational natural laws and directives, whereupon their overall evolution began to advance rapidly, and they greatly elevated themselves spiritually. Consequently, they had to guard themselves even more and did not allow any type of contact whatever to occur between them and the descendants of the creator overlords or with the intelligences from Sirius. After making peace with the inhabitants of their home planets, one old Lyrian Vegan group returned there, while a second faction withdrew to another dimension beyond the Pleiades constellation. Therefore, this group withdrew from our dimension just as the old Lyrians Vegans did previously, and these people found